I'm Callie Seckler.
And I'm Tara Merrick.
This is Worth the Watch. Or is it? Today's show is Lockwood & Co.
We'll be rating the plot, characters, sound, visuals, and originality of the film. Each category earns a popcorn bucket.
Or not. First up is plot.
So the plot for this, from the first episode, I was enthralled with the plot. I really enjoyed it. I thought that the whole concept was interesting, as well as the way that they sort of introduced the backstory through the intro. I thought that was fun. But even though it was fun, it was all over the place. They didn't listen to Show Don't Tell, and they just couldn't seem to decide which plot they wanted to follow. So even though it started with the whole Annabelle and finding her murderer plot, that could have been a whole season, but it wasn't. And instead they jumped into some other plot on episode 4, and they should have kept that going the whole time. In my opinion, they should have done more building up of the characters' relationships in the beginning, because they just sort of jumped from the interview to being best friends for the entirety of their lives. Like, they're too comfortable with each other after 2 days.
Moments that you really saw that they didn't know each other, but other than that, it was kind of brushed under the rug. I feel like plots like this don't really benefit. This is based on a book, or more specifically, a book series. So I feel like that might be kind of lost in it. Maybe not lost in it a little bit, but it can be harder when you're adapting a book into a short series. We've seen it with other things. Netflix did, like The Queen's Gambit is based on a book. There's several other you can list. It's just pacing from a book to a TV show can be very different, and sometimes it can get lost if you're trying to follow exactly with the characters or not follow, trying to make your own thing. I think maybe it just needed a little bit more thought.
I think it definitely should have gone longer too. They tried to stuff it into the 8-episode format that was popularized by a lot of HBO shows, more recently The Last of Us and then Game of Thrones. They had those short seasons
the mini-series.
Yeah, each episode being about an hour long. But these episodes were 40 minutes long, and they only had 8 episodes, and it did not give them near enough time. Mm-hmm. They should have gone for a much different format. They should have gone for, if they wanted to do case episodes, then they could have done case episodes and gotten up to 15 episodes.
It could have been several more episodes long.
And they could have, I know that would have been hard with there being, I think, only 8 books, and each one has their own case, so they would have only been able to make 8 episodes technically with that. But since this is a show and it's an adaptation, they could add more cases.
It could have taken something more along the lines of Sherlock, who has very short seasons with 3 episodes, but again, those episodes are an hour and a half long. It's just, with a show like this, with Netflix making so many specifically 8-episode or 9-episode shows over and over and over again, and trying to fit an entire plot's worth in those shows, yes, it's very good for the binging audience who wants to open Netflix and spend all day watching these 8 episodes and then forget about it the next day. While there is some valuable show to that, it's not what this show could have taken. It could have benefited from a different style or just breaking the boundaries. Even movies, it could have taken the Netflix Fear Street thing, making 3 movies in a row. There's stories that can benefit from that quick 8-episode miniseries, and I don't think this was one of them.
Another thing that was really off with the show was the most basic writing advice to ever exist is show don't tell, and they do not follow that, which might have something to do with the fact that it was only 8 episodes instead of being longer. But they often had, when the characters, specifically with their mental health issues, instead of showing that they had issues, they would have them just say outright how they felt. And the same thing with backstories, instead of showing the emotions in the backstory, in the actual scenes with the acting and that sort of thing, they just had the characters say it to someone else. And all of the characters ended up not making them more shallow, but it removed a little bit of the depth because they just said things outright. They were so open about everything.
Which there is some way that you can do that and incorporate that, but if we're talking about characters where you're trying to make these characters interesting, you're trying to make them likable, and you want the audience to want to know them and want to know more about them. So stuff like that can get a little iffy. The only part that I feel did semi-good was dealing with Lockwood, the main character, I guess you would say. His backstory, we never really find out anything, but at the same time, it's not really hinted at all. The only thing hinted at is there's a door that you don't go into because it has something to do with his parents. And every time his parents are mentioned, it gets completely shut off. it didn't do the best way at building curiosity as it did just saying, okay, that's a character trait, let's move on to the next thing. And based on the last episode, that was what we found out at the end of the last episode, that they actually get to see what's inside the room. You could have been building up that anticipation the entire series long. And just in our opinion, it did not do the best at that, other than little background shots of seeing the door. But for me, a person that's like trying to watch the show, you're not gonna remember that from episode to episode. You're not gonna focus on that.
And that sort of lends itself to how the pacing was really off too. Like how their entire getting close to each other, all the characters getting close to each other, all the past rivalries that come up, and the backstories. They shove all of that into like the first episode and a half, and they don't draw out at all, and it
very little
messes up
he
the
had
pacing.
He had an enemy, and then by the end of the show, he didn't have an enemy. But there was not any of that real that you see with rivals throughout, like that energy or whatever, character growth throughout with that.
So the pacing was off, they did not show. And then there was one thing that I specifically enjoyed that I do want to point out was the sort of mirror motif that they had going on. We know that almost, I don't want to say it's one of the antagonists, but one of the antagonistic pieces of the show was that mirror.
And the power that it held.
Yeah, and they sort of hinted at that throughout the entire show by having shots that you would see characters, but you're seeing them in the reflection of some mirror in a house, and all of the houses
were
filled
window
with mirrors.
pane. I think with George, he saw something in the window pane, which I really liked. And again, once we got to the last episode and found out what the mirror really, really was, you can look back on things like that and be like, wow, stuff like that could have been done with more things and built up. Just built up in a bigger way.
So even though we enjoyed the mirror motif, they sort of fell short in a lot of other areas, so we are not giving it the bucket.
As for characters, I personally enjoyed the characters of this show. I don't know specifically how old they're supposed to be. We Googled it. I think it said 15 or 16.
I think the books was 15, 16, and then in the show they're probably 17.
Yeah, it was a little lost on me because it was mentioned they have no adult supervision, but at the same time it wasn't mentioned that many times. Anyway, I think that was just a little bit fumbled upon. Not that I wanted it to start out being they are this years old, but it was just a little messy. I personally really liked the character growth throughout this. I really liked Lucy's character because we see in the first episode that she does not have the best home life. Something bad happens and her mom blames her for it. You can feel that tension and dynamic, especially I believe it's one of the first times we see her. She's arguing with her mom, and eventually her mom slaps her in the face, which is a stunning moment. But you can tell in the character of Lucy that that's what sets her off. That night she was talking about with her friend for weeks about, running off to London, living their own life and stuff like that. But you can really see that snap in that scene along with the slap at the same time, right? That's when it changed. That's when she's like, no, I'm doing this tonight. I'm leaving and I'm starting my own life. You can feel her anxiety as she's walking around London, which I've never been, but I can assume is a large and scary place that you have no idea what's around each corner, especially with ghosts in it. And she's just trying to beg for a job somewhere, and then stumbles upon.
And the way that has that deadline of when night hits, you won't be safe.
That's added with the curfew. So then she finds these two other people who, in the very first scene, I really liked the way that they were all introduced. You can tell that Lockwood isn't necessarily cocky, but he does have some more pretentious traits. Egotistical, more pretentious traits. While I feel like he does have a character underneath, that's how we were introduced to him. I really like the way that George's character was throughout the beginning of the few episodes, and I mean the whole series, because you get introduced that he worked somewhere else and now works with them. And it's just you're trying to figure out what the dynamic is between George and Lockwood, what the dynamic between all three of them is going to be. I just like the way that they acted. They acted like teenagers, but they didn't necessarily act like teenagers. They acted like teenagers who grew up in a ghost-infested world and just happened to have powers, expected to be the people running it, and didn't know what to do.
Which sort of lends to the way that Lockwood was characterized was very interesting, especially in comparison with Lucy, where Lockwood, you don't know much of anything about him. You barely see, specifically in his costuming. He wears a suit all the time.
He wears a dress shirt and a black tie, which we're looking at George, and he's always wearing these yellowy tones, some brown tones, like whenever they're out. Lucy's always wearing blue. She has her, I guess, signature blue jacket that she wears, but Lockwood, you don't get any information off of him.
Yeah, absolutely. Specifically how like George is very clearly with his clothes. He's a sort of laid back guy. He's a researcher, not a fighter. And then
He
with
wears like
Lucy,
flannels.
Yeah, and with Lucy, she's wearing things that like feel like herself. She is herself in her clothing, wearing cute outfits, but that are also
Even
like
the
functional.
formal dress that she had, like, you know, you get invited to a quote unquote gala, and it was like very specific with her costuming and to her character that I felt really true. I feel like if she would have worn anything other than the beautiful dress that she wore, it would have felt not right.
Yeah,
but it just made it so much more her.
Sort of made her like stand out from everyone else in the gala because she's wearing like a short, fashionable dress where everyone else is wearing the long gala dresses, and that contributes to her character. Whereas with Lockwood, he is almost always wearing a suit, which is sort of like his protection against this world that's like hurt him.
He's forced to grow up, and he was orphaned when he was, I don't remember the exact age, but it was 6.
Yeah.
It was very young. You can tell that this is he owns the house that they're living in. How many 16-year-olds can say they own a house? Like, you can tell that he has more to his character by looking at him, but it's not necessarily showing anything. So that was a really nice way.
Yeah, and along with that, you see Lucy's almost her entire backstory from being 13 and like put into this academy to be trained to become a fighter, and you see her whole story with Nori, and you see how that ends and how she leaves. But with Lockwood, you don't know anything, so they're very interesting to like put up against each other and compare, and because you see so much of Lucy and you see nothing from Lockwood, and you're very interested in him. He's a very interesting character, and sometimes he'll let his guard down, sort of, and you see that again in his costuming when he's wearing just sweats every once in a while, and that sort of shows, almost like symbolizes like when he is himself and his walls are down, and he specifically usually only does that around George and Lucy, which sort of contributes to their relationship. Yeah.
Some other parts of some other characters that I liked, well, there were other characters other than the 3 characters. One of my favorite ones, I can't remember the actress's name, but she plays Molly in Sherlock, which I thought was very fun because I heard her voice and I knew her voice, but I couldn't place her face for some reason. I had to Google it. But I thought that was really fun, and her character drives, I really enjoyed. So obviously this is a problem, as they refer it to, the ghost stuff. It's been, I think it said 50 years. No, it's been longer than that. It's been a long time that this has been a thing. And everybody, it's kind of like a second storyline or even like a third storyline of them trying to figure out what it is. So her character is just driven on wanting to know more. We find out obviously in the last few episodes that she is the quote unquote like bad guy, but she's not necessarily like a villain. Like when we all find out, oh, George is alone with her, like it's not like she snapped and is a completely different person like we see in so many shows. I mean, for example, like Wednesday, you have a character who's been acting one way the whole time, and then, oh, they're the bad guy, so then they start acting another way. While that is a good scene, that reveal, like in Wednesday, I also enjoy a character who is not changing throughout. She was who she is the whole time, and then the audience gets to know that these were her motivations the whole time, and they make sense. It makes sense that she wants the mirror because she is just so curious about the problem and needs to know what it really is so obsessively that she's like forgetting everything else around her.
And on that same track,
that felt really true.
Yeah, on that same track, a lot of the side characters, they had their own motivations and backstories, like with Kips, who was losing his talent and just wants to keep that place and that pride that he gained as
because we're introduced to these talents that kids have, and you have good ones, you have bad ones. Like I know the one lady, Fitz, she has like the special talent that like nobody else has, and then it's revealed that Lucy kind of has that talent. But people like Kips, it's just such a real thing that he would be trying to save that. If you were born in a world where your talent is what's making you money, your talent is what's quote unquote like saving the people around you, and now you're at this phase in your life where you're losing that talent, that is a real like scary character motivation. And I like the way that it was portrayed in it. You know, he's obviously this stuck-up jerk that doesn't like Lockwood, but at the same time he's not. You see vulnerable moments with him. He asked Lucy out, she said no, but he still asked her out. He wants to be a person still. It's just he's faced with so many other challenges at the same time, he almost can't be a normal person. That's probably why all the kids in the show don't feel like they're 16 years old, because they're not our world 16 years old. They're their world 16 years old, which is completely different and unimaginable to us.
So we are definitely 100% giving it the bucket for characters. And next up is sound, which I didn't have a ton to say on, but it wasn't bad.
I've got
I enjoyed
such
it.
a good thing to say on because there were a few fight scenes in this show. I really liked them, but the fight scene started. What song is it? The Cure song.
The Forest, right?
The Forest?
Yeah.
Is it?
I think it's something along those lines.
I don't remember what the song's name is, but first they start fighting, and then the beginning chords of the Cure song starts playing, and then it's a fight scene to the Cure. And I gotta say, that was such a pleasant moment for me. I enjoyed that so much.
Yeah.
It took me kind of by surprise. And it was such a good little scene, a good way to incorporate, like you said before, music that is real to those characters into it.
And the score itself, their original music, was good, and it very much contributed to the vibes of the show. The vibe, in general, the vibes, which isn't a very technical term, but what you felt from the show was very concrete, and it was supported with everything from the visuals to the music to the costumes.
Yes, specifically with the score, it plays at the end of every episode, which is not unusual, but it is a very specific do-do-do-do-do sound, and when you're watching the episode and you're so involved in the storyline, you can forget how far has gone in the episode. But when I'm watching it and then I start hearing those beginning chords and I'm like, no, the episode's about to end. I want to know more. But I hear those beginning chords and then it's da 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 boom, cut to credits, and then the music's in full course. It was just something that was so simple that was done so well. Obviously, there have been other good scores. I feel like I keep comparing to Wednesday, but I loved the Wednesday score. This was a different type of score, but I still felt it was just as effective as something like that can be. And just so individualized, a weird supernatural mystery show of ghosts and teenagers, but it was so on brand and so good.
Yeah, so we are going to be giving it the bucket for sound.
Definitely.
As for visuals, they were, like we said, touch and go. There were some very pretty parts, specifically the scene with the salt sprinklers at the end of the gala. I thought that was really pretty with the way that they had almost UV lighting go down, and the shots from the ceiling looking down on them running up through the crowd.
Cool individual shots throughout it, which we learned that there's a spiral pattern that means a lot to it. George keeps scrawling it. It's him being not possessed by the mirror, but affected by the mirror at least. So once we figure that out as the audience, and then just very subtly the camera will start doing that turning motion, it adds so much with doing so little. But on the other hand, I cannot say how much I disliked the ghosts in this show.
Yeah.
Everything looked, I guess the word might be tacky. It's as hard as it is to make ghosts in TV shows, this one just really was bad. I can't describe it anyway. The first episode, right away when they're going into the house with the stupid screaming with Annabelle ghost, it's just so bad. I can't have words to describe it. Put pictures on
was
screen.
Not very good.
It was not very good, which is awful because the actual shots in the show were good. Lucy always wearing blue and always standing out. As normal as that is, it looked really pretty. The lighting was really pretty, but it just got so overtaken by those bad ghost visuals that it was almost hard to watch.
And another thing with the visuals is, I know this is based on a kid's series, but they already made the leap to make it TV-14 to have some curse words and that sort of thing. I think they should have taken it darker, specifically with the visuals, in how this is a whole show about ghosts and about death and sort of confronting it, and they had no blood at all. And it sort of made any injuries feel cheap. When Lockwood got shot in the shoulder, there was a little bit of red, even though he was collapsing. I think he passed out, and there was nothing.
There were a lot of
shoulder.
things that I don't know, just felt off with their choices. I don't know necessarily why they made those choices. Again, we're saying it's TV-14, but it's something that maybe could have benefited for farther. Obviously, there were a lot of ghosts in the show, so maybe they just couldn't have enough time to plan out what each individual ghost looked like. They refer to them as type 1s and type 2s. But if you're going to categorize the ghosts like that, shouldn't they look different? Because we are hearing those words, type 1, type 2, type 3, but visually they look nothing different. They refer to the ghosts by specific names. I can't remember any of them off the top of my head, but they're oh, we have these coming up to us. We have these coming up to us. But as an audience, there was no visual recognizable difference. If they wanted to make them in specific ghosts, they could have done more things to make them specific ghosts,
and
to change your
that's another thing where it lends to they didn't listen to Show Don't Tell. They just said what type of ghost it was, and there was no way for the viewer to play along and look at the ghost and be like, ooh, that looks like a phantom,
oh, that's
or
definitely
that looks like a siren, or whatever.
It kind of just lost a little piece of it. And then last visual that I absolutely hated was the talking skull, because it was just really bad. And the voice is something else. The voice, whatever it had, was weird. But why did it look so drastically different from when it was talking to not talking? If it's supposed to be a ghost constantly, why does it change the way that it's looking? And then why does it have weird green talking eyes that look awful? It just, again, it took out the quote unquote scare, not that the show was necessarily trying to be scary, but there's something scary to that ghost piece. You're supposed to be quote unquote afraid of these type 2, type 3 ghosts, but they just look ridiculous. He's just a little skull guy yelling things that like glows green whenever they walk near him. Like, it was just so redundant to the point where I was done.
Yeah, so we are not giving it the bucket for visuals. And the originality, it was fairly original. I liked the story, how it was a turn on the usual kids with ghosts story. It was fairly different than
obviously
like,
Ghost is nowhere near a new topic. They, not even just with horror movies, they have been making ghost shows. Does Supernatural have ghosts in it?
Yeah.
Yeah, shows like that. Ghosts have been done to death, but they still found a way to make it a new thing. And I think that comes from the fact that we started so late in the problem. Like, it wasn't an outbreak show. Recently, The Last of Us, while that does take place like 20 years after the issues started, you still see that beginning like apocalypse type episode. And this show just benefited so much from not doing that, from not showing us what it was before. I think they make mentions to it, like with the character, I can't remember her name, the one that's Molly from Sherlock. She was referring to her parents and how her parents still remembered times before the problem and how they just tried to chase that. And then you really get that piece where you can think about that. This is like an apocalypse, a pandemic of ghosts that people still remember the before time, which is like obviously a relatable topic, but it's not something that's focused strongly upon. We're dealing with these kids and this is what their life has been the whole time. And I seriously liked that and I would have been bored if it did that whole, this is what the ghosts first looked like, and now it's this, and now, like, I enjoyed that we are already living in a world that knew things, that had companies set up for it, that had curfews that everyone followed. It was just
It was nice how you only felt the effects and not the original, and then also the way that it showed, it didn't like straight up tell you like how the problem started. It showed you in the intro, which was very fun.
Yeah.
And it didn't show you straight out with that either.
No,
it showed you the death
that's
counter
something
going up,
that the
and
characters have motivations for. Because George, we say he's not the fighter guy, he's the research guy. Something that he's so interested in is the history of the problem. As somebody who, it happened way before they were born. Like, he is still interested because there is not a proven answer. And while I'm glad that they did not focus on that majorly, it was still a really nice part of the story. Being like, okay, we don't know where it started, but neither do the characters. They're just living with what they have to live with. But it was still like, oh, I wonder how it happened. Like, it was a fun story.
Yeah, so we are going to be giving it the bucket for originality, which means that Lockwood & Co. has earned itself 3 out of 5 buckets, making it worth the watch.